starting in a little bit. I would say within 2 minutes. Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
Thank you for coming. I want to warn you, you're on Facebook Live, but the camera's pointed this way, so if you were going to say anything really weird, contain yourself. Hello out there in Facebook land too, and welcome to Jed Smock's 29th reading of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. When our daughter Justina was 3 months old, he made a trip to the University of Florida, and there was a professor there by the name of Lester Hale, and he did this reading, and he also had the script. It's a condensed version of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and he had the script. And my husband bought it, and he came home and said, I want to do this for the family. And we just had 3 little kids at the time, and invited a few friends over, and that was the first time. I'm thankful that my husband has always made it a very Merry Christmas for us, and our children grew up with this. It's has always been one of their favorite parts of Christmas. I want to let you know there will be some carol singing in between the staves. So if you need to use the facilities, just go around the stairs to the left, and then it's the second left. Just wander around. But there will be plenty of opportunity. Make sure your cell phones are off, and afterwards there will be refreshments. Facebook people do not give refreshments. Sorry, but I'm hoping maybe in a few years they'll invent a way to send the refreshments on Facebook, especially my homemade chocolate fudge cake.
Yes, sir.
Come on in.
Oh, it's Claire.
Hi, Claire. We're starting now. So go ahead and have a seat, if you will.
Anywhere?
Yes, anywhere. Welcome. Anywhere is fine.
Thank you.
And now Ron Gordon is going to start us with our first carol, O Come All You Faithful, and you will find your carols there in your seat.
Stand over here, okay?
Oh, come To begin with, old Marley was dead. There is no doubt whatsoever about that. He died 7 years ago, this very Christmas Eve. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, a clerk, the undertaker, and even Marley's partner, Scrooge, signed it. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be strictly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story that I'm going to read to you tonight. They had been partners, and Scrooge had never bothered to paint out old Marley's name on the door of his counting house. Oh, but Scrooge was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. He was a retching, grasping, scraping, covetous old sinner. No one ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Mr. Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children ever once in all of his lifetime inquired the way to such and such place of Scrooge. But what did he care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy without, and he could hear the people in the courtyard outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breast and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye on his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like just one coal. So he had to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" came the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah, humbug! Christmas? A humbug? Uncle, you don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do. Merry Christmas indeed. What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then. What right do you have to be so dismal? You're rich enough." "Bah, humbug! Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer? Bah! If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart." "Why, Uncle, why, nephew, keep Christmas in your way and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it? Well, you don't keep it." "Well, leave me alone then." Don't be angry, Uncle. Come dine with us tomorrow." "Not on your life." "But why? Why?" "Well, I'll tell you why. Why did you get married?" Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love. As if that were the one thing more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas, good afternoon. Nay, Uncle, you never came to see me before I married. Why give it a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon. I'm sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I've been a party. But I've made the trial in homage to Christmas. So I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon. His nephew left the room without an angry word. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season upon the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. Bah, there's a fellow, my clerk. He makes 15 shillings a week, has a wife and a family, yet he talks about a Merry Christmas. Meanwhile, it is growing foggier yet, and colder. The owner of one scant young nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at the first sound of "God rest you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay," Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and an even more congenial frost. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted to the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. "Well, you want all day off tomorrow, I suppose." "If it's quite convenient, sir." "Well, it's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop a half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. And yet, you don't think me ill-used when I pay you a day's wages for no work." The clerk observed that it was only once a year. "Well, that's a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day, be here all the earlier the next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked with a growl. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner, Jacob Marley. The house was dreary enough, but nobody lived in it but Scrooge. The other rooms were all let out as offices. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker at the door, except that it was very large. And also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence at that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley for a long time. Then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without it undergoing any process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. It looked at Scrooge like Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on his ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixingly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. Scrooge went on upstairs in the dark. Darkness was cheap, and Scrooge liked it. He locked himself in. He double-locked himself in, which was not his custom. As he sat down at the small fire to take his bowl of gruel, his glance fell upon an old disused bell that hung in the room. As he looked at it, the bell began to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound. But soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This was succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if someone were dragging a heavy chain over the cask in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "Humbug," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His color changed, though, when without a pause it came through the heavy door and passed into the room before his very eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, "I know him. It's Marley's ghost," and fell again. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, boots. The chain he drew was clasped in his middle. It was long and round about him like it was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought with steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the two buttons of his coat behind. "How now?" said Scrooge. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Well, who were you then?" "And I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" "I can." "Well, do it then. What makes you walk the earth, and why do you come here to me?" "It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men, and travel far and wide. If that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. I am here tonight to warn you that you yet have a chance and a hope of escaping my fate, of wandering through the world witnessing happiness you might have shared, but missed on earth. This is a chance and hope of mine procuring, Ebenezer, so mark me and take what I say. You will be haunted by three spirits. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the fate that I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more. And look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us. The apparition walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the specter reached it, it was wide open, allowing him to float out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked. As he had locked it with his own hands, he tried to say, but stopped at the first syllable. And being very fatigued and in much of need of repose, he went straight to bed without undressing and fell asleep upon the instant.
We three kings of Orient. We three kings of Orient are bearing gifts we traverse afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light. Born a king on Bethlehem's plain, gold I bring to crown him again, King forever, ever since, over us all to reign. Star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light.
Scrooge awoke when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 quarters. So he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, and from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12. Then stopped. 12? It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have gotten into the works. 12? Why, it isn't possible that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon. Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3 quarters more, when he remembered, on a sudden, that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. When the hour bell sounded, a light flashed up in the room, and the curtains of his bed were drawn aside by hand. And Scrooge, starting up in a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them. Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me? I am. Who and what are you? I am the ghost of Christmas past. Long past? No, your past, Ebenezer Scrooge. What brings you here? Your welfare. Rise and walk with me. It would have been vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that the bed was warm, and the thermometer a long way below freezing, and that he had a cold upon him at the time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped its robe in fear. I am immortal and liable to fall. Bear but a touch of my hand here upon my heart, and ye shall be upheld in more than this. As the words were spoken, they seemed to pass through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. "Good heaven!" cried Scrooge. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." The Spirit gazed upon him mildly, while Scrooge was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long forgotten. The ghost and Scrooge walked along the road until they came to a schoolhouse, where, as they entered, they saw a lonely boy reading near a feeble fire. And Scrooge sat down at a desk and wept to see his poor, forgotten self as he used to be. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the paneling, not a drip from the half-thawed water spout in the dull yard behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse bell, no, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with softening influence and gave him freer passage to his tears. "I wish it's too late now." "What's the matter?" asked the Spirit. "Nothing, nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should have liked to give them something, that's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Although they had but a moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city. And it was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time again. But it was evening, and the streets were lightened up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door, and he asked Scrooge if he knew it. "Know it? Wasn't I an apprentice here?" They went in, and as the light of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig, sitting upon such a high desk that if it had been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried out in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart! Old Fezziwig alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen. He looked up at the clock, which pointed at the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his waistcoat, and laughed all over himself. From his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, joyful voice, "Yo-ho there, Ebenezer Dick!" Scrooge's former self, now growing a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice, Dick Wickens, to make sure. Poor Dick. "Yo-ho, my boys! No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Ebenezer. Clear away, my lads, and let's have a lots of room in here." Clear away. There was nothing that they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off as it were dismissed from public life forevermore. The floor was swept and watered. The lamps were trimmed. Fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm, dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book and began turning like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young fellows whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow, and away they all went. 20 couples at once, hands round about and back again, down the middle and up again, round and round. Old top couple starting where they get there, all top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig clapped his hands to stop the dance, crying out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter. During the first dance and the scenes that followed, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost and became conscious that it was looking full upon him. A small matter it is to make these silly folks so full of happiness and gratitude. Yes, small. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now. My time grows short. Again, Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a dress of mourning, and in whose eyes there were tears. It matters little to you, probably very little, the girl was saying to Scrooge. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have liked to try to do, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has displaced you? A golden one. What then? Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I have not changed toward you. Oh, yes, you are. Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until in good season we can improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed, Ebenezer. When we were engaged, you were another man. I was nothing but a boy, he said impatiently. Your own feelings tell you that you are not what you are now, but I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. I release you. She left him, and they parted. Spirit, cried Scrooge, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? But the ghost was gone, and Scrooge was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness. And further, of being in his own bedroom. He had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a deep sleep.
Ron, if you, okay.
Here?
Yeah. I think I can get you like this. Am I standing in front of you?
I was walking on the beach one day toward the setting sun. I saw something shimmering in the sand. As I walked on closer, then I saw a band of gold. The gold looked very dear to me. What's more, that band of gold was studded with diamonds all around. I wondered who this costly piece to whom it did belong. It must be worth the wealth of the world. And then I saw an awesome sight. Jesus did appear. He bent down and picked it up. And then he placed it squarely on his forehead, that glorious band of gold. It fit so perfectly, it looked like it was made for him, for Jesus all along. He called it his band of glory, and he earned it on Calvary. And then I saw he beckoned me with his hand, and he took off the golden band. He held it out and offered for me to put it on that glorious band of gold. I said, Lord, I am not worthy to wear your glory band. He said, I give it to you, my son. Please take it and put it on. I made you worthy with my precious blood on the cross of Calvary. Wear it and give it away, my friend, to all who partake of me. It will always multiply, that band of glory. I want anyone who will you see to wear my glory. So take that band of glory that he offers, put it on your forehead carefully, Know that band of glory will transform you from a life that's full of misery. Take that band of glory that he offers, put it on your forehead carefully. You will see his light come shining through you, so that many others too can see. You will be rewarded for your labor. Your work will not be done in vain. His rewards will last into the future. You will be in his hall of fame. So take that band of glory that he offers, put it on your forehead carefully. Take his love into a hurting world that is dying off so rapidly. So you see, my friends, that band of glory, surely it is meant for me and you. Put that band of glory on your forehead. You're invited to the banquet too. You will be transformed by his glory. You will see his brightness shining through. Know that band of glory that he offers, it is surely meant for me and you. So take that band of glory that he offers. You will see his light come shining through. Know that band of glory that he offers, it is surely meant for me and you.
Amen. The ghost of Christmas present appeared at the appointed time, and after Scrooge had awakened and collected himself, he spoke submissively. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch my robe. Scrooge did as he was told, and held it fast, and he led him straight to the home of Bob Cratchit, Scrooge's clerk. Mrs. Cratchit was anxiously asking, whatever has happened to your precious father, and to your brother, Tiny Tim, and your sister, Martha? Was it as late last Christmas Day by half an hour? Here's Martha, Mother, cried the two young Cratchits. Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha! Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are. Never mind so long as you are come. Set ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm Lord bless ye. No, there's Father coming, cried the two young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. Let's tease him. Hide, Martha, hide. So Martha hid herself, and in came Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him in his threadbare clothes, darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim! He bore a little crutch, and he had his limbs supported by an iron frame. Why, where's our Martha? Not coming. Not coming? Not coming on Christmas Day? Martha did not like to see him disappointed, if it were only in a joke. So she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off into the wash house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. And how did little Tiny Tim behave? Ah, as good as gold, and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much. And he thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple. And it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing stronger and hardy. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor. And back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire where he sat next to his father. Then Master Peter and the two young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon to which a black swan was a matter of course. And the truth to tell, it was something like that in the house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob seated Tiny Tim beside him at a corner of the table. At last the dishes were set, and the blessing said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah! Hurrah!" There was never such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there was ever such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Hello, a great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like a washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastries cook next door to each other, with a laundress next to that. That was the pudding. At last, the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. All the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half of one. And at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers, and a custard cup without a handle. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. May God bless us," which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, for he loved the child, wished to keep him at his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die. No, no, cried Scrooge to the ghost. Oh, no, kind spirit, say he'll be spared. Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground. Scrooge stopped short upon hearing his own name. Mr. Scrooge, said Bob. I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. The founder of the feast, indeed, said Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of mind to feast upon, and I hope he'll have a good appetite for it. My dear, the children, it's Christmas Day. It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure, she said, on which one drinks to the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you. Poor fellow. My dear, Bob replied, still mildly. I'll drink to his health for your sake and the day's, but not for his. Long life to him, and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt. The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness in it. Tim drank it last of all, but he did not care twopence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow upon the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. But then the scene changed, and out of a moment's indecision, Scrooge was surprised to hear a hearty laugh. But it was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, gleaming room with the spirit still by his side. Laughed Scrooge's nephew. If you should happen to know a man more blessed in a laugh than Scrooge's nephew, I should like to know him. He said Christmas is a humbug. Well, he is a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment. And I have nothing to say against him. I'm sure he's very rich, Fred, hinted Scrooge's niece. At least you always tell me so. Well, what of it, my dear? His wealth is of no use to him. He doesn't do good with it. He doesn't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking he's going to benefit us with it. They were devoting the evening to games and music. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp, and played among other tunes a simple little air which had been familiar to Scrooge when he was a child. When this strain of music sounded, all the things that Ghost had shown him came upon his mind. Scrooge softened more and more, and thought that if he could have listened to it often, years ago, he might have cultivated the kindness of life for which his own happiness with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton spade that buried Jacob Marley. But they did not devote the whole evening to music. After a while, they played fourfoots, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. There was first a game of blind man's Of course there was. And then a game called 20 Questions, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something. The rest must find out what. He only answering to their questions, yes or no, as the case was. The brisk fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal. Yes, a live animal. A rather disagreeable animal. An animal that growled and grunted sometimes. And lived in London. And walked about the streets. No, he wasn't made a show of. No, he wasn't led by anybody. And he did not live in a menagerie. Nor was he a pig, or cat, or cow. After every fresh question that was put to him, this nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter and was so tickled he was obliged to get off the sofa and stamp. At last, the plump sister, falling into a similar state, cried out, "I have found it out! I know what it is, Fred! It's your Uncle Scrooge!" Which it certainly was. He has given us plenty of merriment, I'm sure. It would be ungrateful not to drink to his health. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, wherever he is. He wouldn't take it from me, but he may have it nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge! Uncle Scrooge had become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return and thanked them in inaudible speech if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew as he heard the chimes strike 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost, but saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for the very air through which this spirit moved seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? Asked Scrooge. The spirit answered not a word, but pointed onward with its hand. You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us. Is that not so, Spirit? The Spirit inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. "Lead on," said Scrooge. "Lead on. The night is waning fast, and it's precious time to me. I know. Lead on, Spirit." The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. As they entered the city, the spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing the hand of the ghost was pointing to them. Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. No, said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. No, I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead. When did he die? Inquired another. Last night, I believe. Why, what was the matter with him? Asked the third man as he took a vast quantity of snuff out of his very large snuff box. You know, I thought he'd never die. God knows, said the fat man with a yawn. What has he done with his money? I haven't heard. Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me. That's all I know. It's likely to be a very cheap funeral. For upon my life, I don't know of anyone to go to it. But I'll hope to go if anyone else will. When I come to think of it, I'm not sure that I wasn't his most particular friend. But we used to stop to speak whenever we met. Bye-bye. Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their party. The ghost and Scrooge left this scene and went into an obscure part of town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation and bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow. The shops and houses were wretched. The people half naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Far in this den of infamous resort, there was a low-browed, beetly shop below a penthouse roof where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. Upon the floor were piled up heaps of rusty keys and nails and chains and iron of all kinds. Sitting in amongst the wares he dealt in by a charcoal stove made of bricks was a gray-haired rascal named Joe, who was nearly 70 years of age. Scrooge and the famine came into the presence of this man, just as two women and a man slunk into the shop. Very well, then, the first woman was saying. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. If he wanted to keep them after he was dead, the wicked old screw, why wasn't he more natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there alone by himself. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. But the gallantry of her friends would not allow of this. And the man in faded black, mounting the breach first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was supposed to give for each upon a wall and added them up into a total when he found out there was nothing more to come. That's your account, said Joe. Who's next? Now undo mine, Joe. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Asked Joe. Bed curtains? Ah, bed curtains. You don't mean to say you took them down? Things rags and all with him lying there. Yes, I do, and why not? Replied the woman. Well, nothing, except I hope he didn't die of anything catching. Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror as they sat grouped about their spoil. Spirit, Scrooge said, shuddering from head to foot, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My leg tends that way now. Let me see some tenderness connected with death. Or this gruesome sight, Spirit, will be forever present with me. The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet. And as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself. But nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated around a fire. The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hands up to her face. I wanted to show the weak eyes to your father when he comes in for the world. It must be near his time. Past it, rather, Peter answered, shutting up his Bible. But I think as he walked a little slower than he used to when Tiny Tim was here. They were very quiet again. At last she said, in a steady, cheerful voice, that only faltered once, I have known him to walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed. But he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble. And there's your father at the door. She hurried out to meet him, and Bob, in his comforter, he needed it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for the hob. And they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knee and laid, each child, a little cheek against his face, as if they said, don't mind it, Father. Don't be grieved. They drew about the fire and talked, the girls and mother working still. Bob told them, however and whenever we part from one another, and I am sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim. And I know that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves and forget Tiny Tim in doing it. No, never, Father, they all cried. I'm a very happy man, said Bob. Very happy. Spirit of Tiny Tim, thy childish essence was of God. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him into the resorts of businessmen, but showed him not himself. The phantom led him to an iron gate, a churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Scrooge advanced toward it, trembling. Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the things that will be, or the things that only may be? Still, the phantom pointed down to the grave by which he stood. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which if persevered in, they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with me. Show me. The spirit was as immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stones of the neglected grave his own name. Ebenezer Scrooge. Spirit, he cried, tight clutching at its robe, hear me. I am not the man I was. Why show me this if I am past all hope? I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, present, and the future. I will live in the spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing of this stone. In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but Scrooge was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him, holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed. He saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright.
Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. They are not torn down, cried Scrooge, folding one of the bed curtains in his arms. They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here. I am here. The shadows of things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody, and a Happy New Year to the whole world. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist. Clear, bright, joyful, stirring, cold, piping for the blood to dance to. Guns, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells. Oh, glorious, glorious. What's today? Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes. Today? Replied the boy. Why, it's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day, said Scrooge to himself. I haven't missed it. Do you know the Poulters in the next street? The one at the corner? I should hope I did. A remarkable boy, said Scrooge with a glee. Do you know whether they sold the prize turkey that's hanging there? Not the little turkey, the big one. What? The one that's as big as me? What a delightful boy, Scrooge said to himself. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. It's hanging there now. It is? Well, go buy it. And tell them to bring it here, that I may give them directions where to take it. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. I sent it to Bob Cratchit's house. He shan't know who sent it. Why, it's twice the size of Tiny Tim. The hand which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did. Somehow he went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the Poulter's man. As he stood there, awaiting his revival, the knocker caught his eye. I shall love it as long as I live, cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. I scarcely ever noticed it before. What an honest expression it has on its face. A wonderful knocker, wonderful knocker. The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again and chuckled until he cried. He dressed himself, all in his best, and at last got out in the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present. And walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everything with a delightful smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good human fellows said, well, good morning, sir. A Merry Christmas to you. He went to church. He walked about the streets. He watched the people hurrying to and fro and patted the children on the head and questioned beggars and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only get there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. A quarter past. No Bob. He was a full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into the tank. Bob had his hat off before he opened the door. His comforter, too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello!" growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming in here this time of day?" "I'm very sorry, sir," said Bob. "I am behind my time." "You are?" repeated Scrooge. "Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please." "It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "No, I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing anymore. And therefore, I'm about to raise your salary." "A Merry Christmas, Bob. A Merry Christmas, my good fellow, that I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary, and I'll endeavor to assist your struggling family. We will discuss your affairs this afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal. Scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, as good a man as the good old city knew. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them. For he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further dreams of spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle forever afterwards. It was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well. If any man alive possessed the knowledge, may that truly be said of all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. for joining us. A special thanks to the people in Facebook land for being with us. And now our brother Don is going to give the benediction.
May the gracious love of God the Father, the saving grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the strengthening presence of the Holy Spirit be with us now and always. Amen.
Amen. You got plenty of refreshments, so enjoy that.